Yeah, that helped a little bit. That helped a little bit. All right.
So yeah, drawing the teleport one. You can roughly follow that red path. I did, you can stop up there, see that first little thing. So I did my project on the way that artistic representations and then how those artistic representations coded social norms of hierarchical behavior and hierarchical interrelations between people. And then those were first represented and kind of codified in representations of these big, huge monumental stelae, but then they were also embodied through kind of household architectural design.
Remember Maya?
Maya, yeah. So a big thing is that the main focus and point of my research is that representations that of figures that are seen in profile and roughly about eye level are coded as commonplace or lower class, because most people that we're seeing these representations were lower class. And then things that were seen frontally and above eye level were coded as higher, more prestigious personas. So now you can keep following that little red path. So I did a really basic game design technique called a horseshoe that forces you to walk around a space so that you see every wall. So here you have some pretty basic just lifts that usually adorn the four sides of the stelae. And the way that all of this was embodied in architecture was that from a very young age there would be benches in these houses, and those were reserved for the elders. So older, more respected people would be sitting on those, and you would be sitting below them, looking up at them. And also a lot of the right there.
Yep.
A lot of the architecture had a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? 90-degree angles, and so benches that were set along 90-degree angles were allowed people to see one another in profile and kind of control whether or not you considered someone on your level or above your level or below your level. Another thing,
keep going?
Yeah, you can keep going. Another thing that I found, not as detailed research on, but some, is that it's potentially thought that the actual who was allowed to physically get that close to the stelae and see them up close was also correlated with, prestige. So these were like pretty masterfully crafted objects. So traditionally it seems like if you were a higher class personage, you'd be allowed to get much closer to them during public rituals, while as if you were kind of, like a big ninja across cultures, you'd be a little bit further back. So then you go around the corner. So I wanted to try and portray two different sides, like three sides. So you're going around here, right there. You're seeing three different sides of pretty large monumental architecture, and then this kind of sculptural thing that I often think about of how you kind of circumambulating a thing. Where does our perspective of two-dimensional images stitch together into a three-dimensional one? So I kind of wanted to, on the sides of the square that contain this three-dimensional image, have basically profiles that correlate to almost silhouettes. You know how to do the scale thing, Ranger?
Yeah.
So you make yourself a little bit bigger and get some more detail on it and kind of phase through the walls. It's hard to just kind of see from down there, or that the wireframe ends up looking 3D. But a big part of it was that hopefully, you're seeing these littler guys that are about your human size. It should seem about Ranger's size or something, and then these is being much like, oh crap, working with that. So how this is different from Western culture is Western culture's visual kind of representational thought is just 100% dominated by linear perspective after the Renaissance. And the interesting thing about linear perspective is it kind of implicates you in the work, because there's one correct viewpoint where everything really coheres. So it's almost like that is where you're standing. And I thought it was interesting that I've read a lot of stuff about VR, and VR is in some senses the ultimate technological expression of linear perspective, where your eyes and the screen get smashed together into one thing. So you can really in an even more embodied sense, forget that this is still a two-dimensional image that you were portraying, that you were seeing three-dimensional. In contrast, the Maya, were often seen by early anthropologists as primitive people because they couldn't, because they thought that they could not portray realism in terms of linear perspective. But like clearly there's a lot of really advanced craftsmanship that goes into the stuff that this is just vaguely based on. And there's a really great quote I found by, where is it? By Donald Robertson, which says, actually in contrast to the idea that they were incapable pre-Columbian Mayan artists were not interested in drawing nature as they saw it because theirs was conceptual, not a visual art. And the tiered cosmology actually ends up potentially, working better to be represented in these very vertical, two-dimensional planes. Yeah, and then the other thing that's interesting is this is something that's really pretty hard to grok as like a Western linear perspective person, but it's thought that when there's a tiered, overworld, like sky, gods, earth, and then underworld, although all of those exist on their own, like, kind of latitudinal planes that we're looking up or forward at, each of those is conceptually viewed, even from below, as if you were looking straight on at it. That is the correct place to look at it from, which I'm too Western to understand exactly how that works. But I do think it's interesting that the idea of looking up at something as a place of veneration is pretty basic. I'm sure it comes from, a physical, like, you're a large person, I'm afraid of you kind of idea. But it's totally been taken up by, cinema. Like, pointing down shots and pointing up shots are a pretty basic cinematic technique for creating a sense of power or powerlessness.